Good morning, everyone. On here. It's great to be here with both of you today. So really, the potential for transforming human health is held out as one of the really significant areas where quantum computing can have an impact. And I know just from talking with people at this event over the last 24 hours or so that there's a lot of interest in what that really means. So we've got a couple of people here today who are extremely able to speak to this. And I'm going to introduce, we've got Professor Jeremy O'Brien, who's our resident physicist here, who can tell us everything quantum. He's the co-founder and CEO of PsiQuantum, a photonics-based quantum computing company that's working to deliver the first, or two of the first, commercial utility scale quantum computers in the world. They'll be the anchor tenant at the IQMP facility when that opens here, and also building a very similar scale quantum computer in Brisbane, Australia. Jeremy, before starting PsiQuantum, was a professor of physics and electrical engineering. You're at University of Bristol and Stanford, and founding director of the Center for Quantum Photonics and Quantum Engineering and Technology Labs, which is a world-leading center for quantum at Bristol. So welcome, Jeremy. And then Linda Ray is Senior Vice President, Business Technology Solutions at the drug maker AbbVie. She oversees technology systems, data assets, focused on enabling business growth and operational effectiveness. Linda joined AbbVie in 2017. Prior to that, she held technology roles at W.W. Grainger, a Fortune 500 industrial supply company, and has a background in human resources as well. AbbVie, for those who don't know, is a global biopharmaceutical company, had 2024 revenue of over $56 billion, and they're known for their innovative therapies, particularly in immunology, and you may know some of their products, Humira, Skyrizi, Rinvoq, Imbruvica, which is an oncology drug, and they also make Botox. So given Linda's extensive experience with implementing technology across complex enterprises, I really look forward to hearing what she has to say about bringing quantum into the innovation pipeline at AbbVie. So welcome, both of you. So first off, I mean, we hear a lot about how quantum is going to transform medicine and human health. Jeremy, can you give us sort of your physicist perspective on why quantum is so uniquely suited to tackling some of the big problems in biology and chemistry, and where biology and chemistry come together in drug development in particular?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here with both of you. And indeed, this is what matters actually. If we're to really realize the potential of this technology. For those of you who don't know, Botox is also used for migraines and chronic pain and things like this. I didn't know that until recently, but I've actually speculated that for many years, because at some point I was working with a PT or a physio or something like this. I was like, I feel like just getting some Botox, into the thing. Who said that's cheating? And then I have a dear friend who's a surgeon, and he said, yeah, I'll do it for you. I didn't take him up on that. To the question, I'm in the habit of provoking anyone who has the patience to listen to me, and we'll see who does in the audience today. And apologies, Linda, in advance for those who don't.
I'll probably join in.
That we can't actually start to do chemistry until we have a quantum computer. That's designed to be provocative, because obviously we feel like we've been doing chemistry in a modern way for over a century. But it's also designed to be true in the sense that if you can't simulate the building blocks of the world that you find around you, never mind the building blocks of the world that you're trying to engineer, what are you doing? And in my head, there's a cartoon of a blacksmith's workshop that's supposed to output F-35s. And I'm going to move down the couch a little bit in case I start being offensive to someone from the pharmaceutical industry. But I usually highlight that industry because that's a huge industry that has not lacked for resources to do R&D, but unfortunately, it's largely stuck in a kind of blind trial and error regime. And for me, the proof positive comes from Mother Nature, right? Like, we use the same chemistry set as Mother Nature uses. She performs miracles, and we are amateurs, right? And to be, again, borderline facetious, but I'm pretty sure this building didn't grow from a seed that dropped from the neighboring building, and that it doesn't harvest all of its energy from its local environment, and when bits fall off, they just regrow, as an example. Now, that's pretty far into the future, but it's the same chemistry. Everything that you see in nature can, in principle, be done by us, and this is indeed the genesis of as the quantum computing folk in the audience will know, this is the genesis of quantum computing, is the great Richard Feynman observing that, nature is quantum. If you want to simulate a quantum system, it's real hard on a conventional computer because, you can quickly convince yourself that generally you need an exponential amount of paper just to write down the state of a system. So you better be using a quantum system. And so that's the ultimate potential. But then I think it's sort of interesting to think about how organizations like ours then enmesh with one another to really accelerate the prospect. Obviously, you've got to build the real thing, right? A real quantum computer that can tackle these things. But then as you're doing that, you need to start bringing the two things together.
Right. So just on a really fundamental level, when we're using a quantum computer to interrogate natural systems, chemistry, biology, we're getting down to the atomic level where things really matter. So there's other ways of looking at this, but we're actually going in and looking at the atomic level reactions that are happening.
Yeah, at the molecular level, calculating properties of molecules is applied quantum mechanics. Mm-hmm. And the way we've gone about that in the academic world is to make it so small and simple that we can do it. And then in the industry world, we've thrown as much compute at it as we can afford and gone as far up an exponential curve as we can climb and made every approximation that we can imagine, simplified things as much as possible. But that leaves us in that blacksmith's workshop, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Linda, thinking about the drug development process at AbbVie, you're spending millions of dollars and many years to come out with really like each new product. What are some of the specific pain points or bottlenecks where current technology is failing us, or where we could perhaps improve with a new tool?
Yeah, one of the things I want to start with, it's incredibly humbling for me to be sitting next to someone like Jeremy, who has spent so much of his life actually trying to solve a problem that is incredibly important just to kind of humanity, right, in terms of our ability to do this right. And I'm sure, Jeremy, there's been more dark days than sunny days in terms of this, but similar to kind of the AI journey, we are incredibly hopeful in terms of what these technologies will actually allow us to do. But to do that, I've had the good fortune of not just, I didn't grow up in pharma, I've come out of a different industry. And so the first thing, Adam, I actually had to do was actually just learn. It's easy to say there's a drug discovery process, but you actually got to go in and start to realize, what does that actually mean? And why doesn't it actually have as much success as it actually could? And I get to wake up every single day. That's why I'm on the edge of my seat sitting here on this couch, because every single day I get to come in. I'm not a quantum physicist. Come on, Jared, join me. I'm not a quantum chemist. I'm not, a computational chemist. I'm not a computational biologist. But in my role, my job is to come in and figure out how I make them the best they absolutely can be, because they have that same passion around making sure that we actually can cure disease. So you think about the fact that you start in this very early discovery process of where you're just doing really high throughput screening of compounds to actually see what actually might be viable, right? So 1 in 10,000 may make it. The reality, you pass that along to another group who's looking at toxicity relative to those things, because what we want is drugs that are actually, and products that are safe for people to actually be taken. You'll have a failure rate coming out of that. Then you have to look and you pass it on between computational chemists, you pass it on to computational biologists. And they may all be speaking English, but I've been in a room with the two of them at one time, and sometimes it's like they're not even speaking the same language. But think about that from a process perspective and the workflow perspective, like you're handing off different ways of describing a little bit of the process. And there you learn more in that next phase about efficacy. And then certainly a lot of that simulation is done on animal models in a lot of cases. It's what we know. We're starting to incorporate a lot of real world evidence in terms of how do we continue to refine those models. But in the end, what really matters is how it actually performs in a patient. And what we're after is not just marginal impact in terms of patients' health. We're looking for significant impact on patients' health. And those bars are incredibly high. And so on average, to your point, Adam, 7 to 10% actually make it, right? From that very, very early stage. There was recently a McKinsey study that basically said of all the technological advancements we've actually had, we're spending more on drug discovery, and we're actually not seeing productivity actually increase. And so you have to actually step back and say, well, wait a minute, is it about the application in any specific technology? It's not no longer just to add more compute to the problem. There's something fundamental that we're missing in terms of arming these individuals with being able to make the absolute best predictions that we can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And just to put a fine point on it, we are bringing a lot of computing into life sciences, especially in the last couple of years, a lot of AI. So why isn't everything just an AI problem? What's the piece of this that quantum is bringing? And I'm thinking it may have something to do with the ability to actually simulate processes rather than just predict them. But
you got it.
Okay.
In more words than that, we're rightly very excited about AI right now. We're building mega scale systems to really tackle some important problems. And I don't think anyone knows exactly where that is going to lead. But if you want to have a pretty good insight into it, I would ask that man right there who's texting on his phone. Yes, you, Peter Barrett. One of my board members and principal at Playground. Those guys have had an incredible track record of telling me things over the years that no one else tells me for years in advance. But I think it's open, right? Like, we know it's going to be a huge impact. It's going to be broad and deep. But you said it in your question, which is that AI takes vast amounts of data and gives you approximate predictions based on that data, and it's therefore as good as the data that you feed it. So, in the LLM world, of course, that means once you've read every word ever written by every human being who's ever lived, there's nothing else to eat. But we already see how powerful that is before we're at that point. In drug discovery specifically, organizations like Linda have got a vast amount of data at the molecular level, at the chemistry level, that they have fought long and hard to obtain, right? Like, you have to synthesize a molecule, implement experiments on it, et cetera, et cetera. And traction can be got by feeding that data into an AI, and then again, it's as good as the quality of that data, and you might find out that one of your staff from 10 years ago didn't quite do the full analysis or whatever it was. But more significantly, you're stuck in the space of that data, right? There's an infinite number of molecules that you could synthesize. You know, the periodic table is a Lego set from which you can build anything you want. There's literally an infinity of things that you can build from that. So you're necessarily stuck in a very small subspace of that with the data that you have. And then quantum computing, by contrast, as we know from this event, in some sense does the opposite, right? It does exact first principles calculations and gives you exact answers to questions because of this simulation that we described before. And then, you know, it's interesting that it's probably immediately obvious to anyone who doesn't already know this that there's a beautiful synergy between these two things, right? So, you know, we can take all of Linda's data, run it through the AI and say, oh, well, this molecule should have this, you know, binding energy or whatever it is. And then we can run that through a quantum computer and confirm or otherwise, save her the bother of synthesizing if it's otherwise, and if it's confirmed, say, yeah, all right, now go spend a bunch of time and money and synthesize that thing. And then in the reverse order, you can think, okay, I wish we had some data that was a bit more spanning around this space. Well, let's use the quantum computer and get some really high quality from exact first principles data and feed the AI again, right? Okay, now it has data that's much more expansive and potentially much more accurate. And then it'll make another prediction outside of its original constrained space. And then again, Linda can say, hey, Jeremy, would you mind just quickly checking that this AI is actually spit up? And then we can check again. Okay, we run that predicted molecule through the quantum computer. Does it really have that binding energy to the target or whatever it is? So that's how I see it, but I think it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was first trying to understand just this notion of this opportunity in our space, there's a tendency to be like, I just need another large computer, right? I just need another large supercomputer that I can just really dovetail into a small vertical piece of this process. And the more that I've actually reflected on that, and a little bit of a, you know, and I think this is a further question that you have around this notion of what have we learned around the power of kind of AI to do that in our business, is this notion of you almost gotta flip the problem not vertically, you have to flip the problem almost horizontal in order to get more value out of it. And being able to widen that ecosystem, because we call them prediction machines. We have ensured that we don't think of them yet as decision machines, because they don't have enough data to become decision machines, no matter how good the models certainly are. They're getting more, you know, better every single day. The more data get, the better they get. But there's an important distinction in that. The power of bringing the two together is, what if you actually could predict the compounds that you wanted to use, but then you could get a real validation to actually be able to say, yes, this is what you should actually prioritize, and how we know that is X, Y, Z. And then, as you mentioned, this ability to broaden the ecosystem. You know, what's powerful about that is you start to bring what ends up today somewhat being very siloed, very specialized knowledge about how they see a problem. But what if you could actually get them understanding and seeing and speaking so much the same lexicon, using kind of these first principles around how you think about the data, and would that allow you to actually have a much more demonstrable impact? So we don't see it as an or. I think we certainly see it as an and, but I think it's taken us a while to truly shift away from, I need another cool whiz-bang computer that's really super, super cool, to this notion of that will get us some value, but what we're after is continuing to have a remarkable impact, and to do that, likely like as you mentioned, Jeremy, flipping the problem a little horizontal to get the most pull through.
I thought it'd be interesting for the audience, in case it wasn't clear in what Linda just said, but to make it explicit, humans are at the center of that process that she just described, right? Because you know, there's this thing called intuition, right? And it propagates across hard science and engineering, technology, and so on. And what Linda's describing is that the people who have intuition about what, you know, how a quantum computer could be used or how you could simplify components of it, the chemists, right? Like these people, they tell you things that you really wonder how they know that. And then when you challenge them on it, you realize that they also kind of wonder how they know it. But they know it.
Very true.
And you know that they know it, right?
And I know I don't know it, so.
But you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's which is Linda's point about the ecosystem. You've got, you know, it's a world of powerful tools, right? Powerful tools, AI and quantum computing, and humans with an intuition, and, you know, at the risk of going off topic, right? Like on the AI front, we know that computers have been better at chess than humans for a long time, but we also know that a hybrid human computer is better at chess than anything.
Sure. So let's talk about implementation a little bit. Linda, so when exactly did you decide to start this quantum journey, and why now? So PsiQuantum's big machine is not yet complete, and other existing quantum computers are, I think it's generally recognized, do not have the capacity to tackle the really big problems that we eventually, you know, want them to. So when did you get in, and why now?
So I mean, we've been participating in whether it be consortiums or POCs since 2019. Actually, our first POC was in 2020. We've been spending most of our time in and around this notion of computational chemistry. Certainly, it's a target that if we can't solve it there, we've got to ask ourselves kind of what we're doing. So really, but our focus has just been on understanding the integrity of the models. We spent a lot of time with people doing academic research, certainly through, you know, again, contributing our scientists' time in terms of advising this notion of the integrity of the models, how that technology actually works in the context of these processes. And I think that's just like an incredibly important piece of why we have really said, look, we've got to lean in a different way. And as a CIO, look, there's nothing better for me than being able to kind of like sit back and wait for someone to be like, you got the answer yet, right? But the reality is that we see a lot of answers and we see a lot of solutions looking for the wrong problems in order to get value. And we're not in a tech race as much as we are in an outcome race, because we have people on the other side of our value stream and our discovery process that are waiting on us to actually come up with cures. And so we see it at much like we have a responsibility to lean in a different way, because whether it's AI or other technologies, the technology's really amazing. And then I bring it in and I put it in front of scientists and they're like, doesn't help me at all. Doesn't actually solve the biggest critical problem that we actually may have in terms of being able to get speed or predictability or getting more kind of probability of success and really changing that metric. And so sometimes we've held that conversation a little tighter on the technology side, so bringing technologists to front those conversations. We're really now talking about how do we do that in partnership with these amazing scientists that we have in our business, and really leaning in to help, you know, firms like Jeremy and others to actually be able to say, let us help you understand the process, the way people work, the way humans work, right, relative to actually understanding these. Because in the end, it's about getting that ecosystem absolutely correct and getting people over the right targets. Sometimes it's not the technology that's actually limiting. Sometimes it's other changes that we actually have to make. So those discussions are really, really valuable. And so I think it's a little bit why we're becoming a bit more active in terms of these discussions so that we can help shape. We need it to work.
Right.
We want it to work. And so the reality is we want to make sure that we're partnering in a different way to help get them over the right target.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're doing internally is lining up people around the specific questions that you
That's
want to
right.
examine.
That's exactly right.
And who do you need to bring in on the AbbVie side into that process? So you mentioned it can be heavy on the technology side, but you also really want to bring the actual researchers into this as early as possible.
As early as possible. And you want to bring a combination, because it would be really easy to be like, we have a chemistry problem. And so you bring in a computational chemist only. It's like, well, what if you actually brought them and the head of genomics together, right? What if you actually created a forum for some of that cross-pollination to actually occur in and around this discussion? Right? We see actually sparks fly in our business, whether it's an AI topic or any other business problem, when we continue to find ways for people to come together, to think together about how those problems actually solve. Otherwise, it'll pass one gate, and then it's just gonna fall into another set of processes with another set of technologies behind it. Doesn't mean that it'll move in the same way.
Right. So Jeremy, I'd love to hear your perspective on how PsiQuantum thinks about working with a customer like AbbVie in these what I'll call preliminary stages. So figuring out the right problems and figuring out an approach to those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Linda has touched on this twice now, and it sort of reminded me of a moment maybe 15 years ago. What Linda's been describing is getting people who speak different languages and somehow intermediating between them, and a kind of a flash that stuck in my brain, which was part of the genesis of this company, is that I'd assembled a crowd of people, and it's multi-dimensional, but imagine that it's like linear, and I just had this moment where we've had a full day of conversations and brainstorming and ideas and things are coming up, whatever. And I was sitting there and I thought, you two, you can't even speak to one another. But with all those people in between, we can do what we're doing here, right? And what we're doing here is a little bit like jamming and coming up with a new song, right? It's the scientific, technical version of that. And so the short answer to that question is that we just bring we bring the right people together to do exactly that. And a more sophisticated way of saying what we do at the moment, by my co-founder Pete, who I usually like to have sitting here instead of me.
He's good at this stuff.
And he mustn't be in the audience because otherwise he would be.
He'd jump up here.
Yeah. He calls it your homework. And your homework is not sitting on stage telling people that, yeah, we're going to save the world and create new drugs and so on. It's sitting down together and saying, all right, what is the give us a list of problems. Us saying, like none of them look like they're amenable to quantum computing. Linda and her team saying, yeah, but what, why, and so on. Okay, but what about this one? Yeah, well, that's interesting. Is there a existing quantum algorithm, right? Like, I think there's a perception that people are inventing algorithms. Inventing algorithms is like doing Nobel Prize winning science, right? That's true across computing, right? Can we, if there's such an algorithm, then when we compile it into code, how big a quantum computer do we need? How many qubits and how many computational steps? The first answer is invariably way too many of both. Oh my goodness, we should just pack up and go home, right? Wow, we're trying to build a 1 million qubit system and so on. Okay, calm down, everyone. Are there optimizations that we can make at the problem level itself, right? Mm-hmm. Like, can we fine tune exactly the bit that we're treating with, et cetera, at the algorithm level, particularly at the compilation level, right? Like, there's efficiencies to be had there. And then at the error correction level itself, most of that is completely generic, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's got nothing to do with the hardware you're running on, in the same way as people who earn millions of dollars a year as software developers, most of them don't even know what's running on a CPU versus a GPU, never mind what brand it is, whatever. Someone is always right down at the bottom of it. And then you iterate that process, you go through the different examples and so on. And with a specific example, you iterate that and you find it. And that's where the kind of intuition comes in on both sides. So that's a sketch of it. I hope that's
And so like, to perhaps drastically simplify, a big idea here is that when a computer of sufficient size and fault tolerance is ready to use, someone like AbbVie is ready with the algorithms that they need,
100%.
and they're ready to
100%.
plug it in and go.
Yeah,
100%.
because my plan is, spend 30 years of my life, get this thing built, and then say, anyone want to have a go on this thing? Yeah. No. And I usually describe that work that Pete calls your homework as going from hype to code, right? Like we want to get the code written, ready to run on that thing, ready to be deployed. And here's the good news on that front in this whole process. Sometimes there's a misnomer in this, a misunderstanding in this industry, like, will it work? And how do we know that it'll work? And how do we get prepared? You know what? With around 1 million qubits, you're going to distill around a few hundred logical error-corrected qubits that you can implement, millions to billions of computational steps on, right? Guess what? On your iPhone, iPad, laptop, whatever you've got in front of you now, you can write and run a simulator for dozens of logical qubits. You get all the compute power that you can buy, you might be able to run a 49 logical qubit. So that's half the size of a utility scale quantum computer, approximately speaking. And so, that code can be run in a negligibly smaller version on a regular computer simulating a quantum computer. So that gives you a lot of confidence in what you produce.
Right. Thank you for that. So we've talked about AI coming into life sciences, which, there's not a biopharma company that's not using AI in some way right now. I'm curious from both of you, but maybe starting with Linda, what have you learned about the implementation and adoption of AI tools within your company, and how is that informing how you're thinking about the introduction of quantum?
I think it's our journey is probably typical as many companies. The hype cycle was so fast and so steep because of the consumerization, right, of this. Yeah. It's just like we all had it, which was different than normal enterprise kind of technologies that has to earn its way into an organization. And so you can imagine, right? You start, and this is a little bit of the concern that we actually have about quantum, which is it's a hammer, everything's a nail kind of analogy, right? And the reality is that means you're doing a lot of activity, but not actually driving. And again, we're not in a tech race, we're in an outcomes race. That's really the DNA of the AbbVie business and many businesses. And so we've done everything from just experimentation to general utility tools that we actually put, for all of our team members. We have certain things in every part of our business that are incredibly important, whether it's improving the predictions that we actually make between one phase to another, everything from assurance of supply to how do we actually think about better targeting, the outreach, if we think about our medicines and making sure we know who our populations are. So we see the advent of it in a lot of different pockets. But I think the reason I'm so passionate about this notion of bringing people together to think about how you can rewire. The real value from AI, agents, name it, actually isn't by having these things run sidecar. And the reality is most of the way that we've solved business problems is a direct result of the way it's all we had at the time, right? We did the absolute best we could. And individuals got very, very creative in terms of this is the way that this process can actually work. And really untangling those things in a business is actually quite hard, right? Just being completely honest and transparent. And so we're spending a lot of time understanding like what is it that we need to do to actually be able to go think about these technologies now in the context of, if we had these at the start, how might you rewire a process? How might you actually reimagine what the work is? How might you reimagine all these processes and all this scaffolding that you've built up to control your business? Can those scaffolds be torn down because you can start actually at the front? And I think this is the parallel, Jeremy, for me in our discussion, which is this notion of, look, when the promise, I'm not going to say if, when the promise of all the work that you're doing actually comes to fruition, think about how incredibly powerful it is for that set of facts, not assumptions, not approximations, those things to be at the very front of how you think about the work. All of this scaffolding that gets built up in and around organizations starts to come down so that you can actually apply the focus, the mind share, the next technology and vision on the next thing that really matters. And I think that's really the reflection that we've been having is, we're going to get efficiency, we're going to continue to get productivity, we'll continue to get better predictions out of these things. We will raise kind of all boats in our organization, but we are challenging ourselves to understand what parts could we actually rewire in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jeremy, I'm just wondering from your perspective, how has this hype cycle around AI impacted your ability to talk with customers, and that either they're like, we've already invested a lot in this other stuff, like we've already got AI, we don't need quantum, or we've used it and the results have been, not quite what we hope yet. Like, do you find that you're getting into these sort of like either or conversations there, or?
Yeah, I think there's invariably a desire from folk to understand, which bit does what, how do these things, et cetera. But largely it's great environment because people have really woken up to something that they forgot for decades, I feel, which is that hardware's a thing. I think this nomenclature, the cloud has been very problematic for a long time. This idea that, there's some ethereal kind of information sitting out there somewhere. Yeah, it was never sitting out there somewhere. It was on some really big, expensive hardware, right? And I think that has been brought to front of mind. We see, data centers overlaid on Manhattan, and they're dwarfing Manhattan, right? Like that people are thinking, AI supercomputers and so on. And I think that so helps the field of quantum computing because actually you have to build a really, really big quantum computer, right? Like something that looks actually modest relative to those systems that we have today, but you have to build a modest scale data center HPC type system. And, that's why we're doing it right here in Chicago, because, very soon after having a conversation about that, the governor and his team and the whole ecosystem here, okay, so we need to find a piece of land, like not a lab at a university or whatever. We need to find a big piece of land. And by the way, then we need to get power to it, right? And for me, that was really one of the things that sticks in my mind in the very rapid process that we got this project up and running was that ComEd, the local power utility, are there at the first meeting, along with everyone else from the ecosystem in our shop in Silicon Valley. And I think, and Peter could comment on this, and I think I've maybe seen Tony Kim, and if you really want to understand the future of AI, get them both a few drinks into them and get them into an argument with one another. Not that they're prone to arguing with one another, but two of the smartest people who can see further out, Tony Kim from BlackRock. But But I think that's been a fabulous service to the world by AI, as well as its impact, right? As well as its applications and impact. It's just a hard reminder that, yeah, I may have said it to Peter, maybe not, because he was a bit too sophisticated, but I used to say to investors before we raised a cent, even if you upload yourself to something, God forbid why you might want to do that, I don't know. It will be to something, right? Like some physical thing. And in fact, this is another entry point into quantum computing is the brilliant Rolf Landauer saying information is physical. It's not some abstract idea or some ethereal whatever. It has a physical instantiation. And indeed, a quantum computer is one where you extrapolate from that idea to, well, what if that process, what if the instantiation and the processing of it is quantum mechanical? Anyway, I'm getting off topic.
No, I could actually just say, I was funny because I said to someone, I was like, wow, infrastructure is really cool again, right?
No
it's
kidding.
Because I'm sending pictures to people of how they're cabling, right? Like there's an art to how you rack a system and how you cable.
Sure.
And when you see, it's a work of art. And when you see some of these data centers coming up, I was like, look at that. Because I think, to be honest with you, in a world where we were selling information in a lot of cases, applications became the way and kind of disintermediated the way that, that's where people worked. The reality is the lifeblood. Like the lifeblood runs through 100%. It runs through cables. And to be honest with you, it's still pretty amazing, right? There's days when I kind of wake up and I'm like, it's amazing that we can pick up our phone and actually get a correct answer of like what my next meeting actually is. We take it for granted, but it's come from, decades of people putting kind of their sweat and tears into trying to make these models work.
And imagine a world where we move into taking quantum computing for granted in your business, right? And I think this taken for granted is important, right? Like it's important to build on what we have and then remind ourselves what we have. And I think if you want to really imagine the future, that's the way to go about doing it, where you've got unlimited access to as we do today.
Right. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I see we're at time, but it's great to leave us on this note of thinking about the future. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface here, but please continue the conversation with these two when you catch them out there. Really great discussion. I'm excited to see what the next steps are. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.